So in this stream, I'm going to be doing a stone wall. I had quite a few people questioning whether or not they could convert the brick texture from the tutorial last week into something that was a bit more like crazy paving. Let me find a reference. Somebody emailed me some good references. If I can find them. Yeah, stuff like this. So the issue with doing this with the brick setup is that you don't have rows, and the brick setup is entirely based on having rows, like horizontal rows one on top of each other. And like you can randomize within the row, but the vertical start and stop in that row is defined. Whereas in this, where you have like just kind of random stones placed wherever, you don't have that kind of luxury to work within that order. However, we can I just drag this in? There we go. So with the voronoi node, we can actually do something very similar, like literally just the voronoi node. So if obviously we want the mortar lines to be our control, so I'm going to change it from F1 to distance to edge, and you can see that we've got something immediately. So add a burn. There's too much of this. If I make the color darker in slot 2, too much of this is just entirely black. So you can limit the amount of this that this affects by increasing that value in the second socket. So if I set that to the full amount, and then I can just tweak this until I've got the limit of what I want, then I know that everything below that is going to be affecting in it's going to be controlling the stuff that you can actually see. It's not going to be kind of wasted. We're working on plane, so I'm going to use Eevee. Also means that you can position stuff around corners and do things like that. UV map. And it also means that I can get rid of these little stones by changing this to 2D. So it'll have a much more uniform spacing, because if I just duplicate this and go to F1, all of these points, right? So voronoi is calculated by loads of different points, and this fall off is just the position from those points. So if you set this to 2D, then all of those points exist within a 2D surface, within a plane. And because we're working on a plane using a UV map, that's perfect for what we want. So yeah, there are two ways for us to get mortar. This is kind of the simple way. So I'm going to just add another noise node in before here, just to give us the wobble. So that's quite a simple way to get stones, pretty cheap. However, if you wanted to have these corners to be rounded, then we're going to have to do something else. Because in here, you can see that most of our corners are round, and everywhere that we have intersecting mortar joints, all of the stones, they get a little bit bigger because the stones are curved away from it. So a way for us to do this, and this is quite a useful technique just in general, if you have a voronoi node set to F1, and we just need to plug in the UV there. And then if you have another voronoi node set to smooth F1, so you can see the difference here is that we don't have the sharp, this fall off kind of goes away. If you subtract one from the other, like this, then we have rounded corners straight away. It's a really like cheap way to get like natural looking things, like veins and things like that. There we go. So this kind of gives you that sort of lozenge kind of shape. And then we can change this, right? We can multiply this down, the smooth F1. Just view. View the output. So we should be able to reduce the amount that this is affecting. Maybe we need to go higher. Yeah, giving a bit of control over that, over those edges there. Cool, so that's like sort of the basis for how we're going to be working today. Going to be using linear light on here as well, just so we get those variations in. Cool. So now we're not going to be using greater than, we're going to be using a color burn. And we're going to be doing something else with it as well. Because where we've got big gaps, I don't want to have like a... Oh, I might need to flip it as well. Yeah, so I want my stones to be whiter, because so when I think about building materials, I always think about the height map first, and then I color it. That's probably the easiest way, I think, to do it. And it's a lot easier to kind of visualize how you're working as well. So I'm just going to chuck a map range on here and just really simply like flip it like that. So 1 and 0 is the output from 0 to 1. And then I can affect my input range so that I've got more, like a greater range in there, like that. So around about 0.35. So you can see this is starting to look like our height map if there was no mortar. Then we can use the color burn to start bringing in some more of the mortar there. So just do that trick again where you set it to full and then do this. Yeah, using subtraction to flip is a cheaper way to do it. But if you want to have a different range, then instead of having to like subtract and then multiply separately, just do it all in the map range and it's going to save you a node. I know when you talk to people about doing node, like people call it node golf. So it's like working out how to do material with the fewest nodes. It's not always the lightest. Like in terms of the number of math nodes you use, then potentially, yeah. But for example, if you go and you drop a smooth F1 into your material, then it's going to get pretty heavy pretty quick. And actually, like sometimes people will ask me to optimize their materials for them, especially like if things are starting to go a bit slow. And the first thing I go is like find the noise textures, and you'll see that they're all turned up to detail 16. And that is just don't do that unless you really need it to be a high level of detail. You probably don't need it to be a high level of detail. You can probably get away with like 3 or 4 if you do need the like fine variation. Let's just increase this a little bit so we can see the difference. So there's a difference between like, and also you have to think about your viewing distance, right? So what asset are you making and how close is the camera going to be? So I'm assuming this is a brick wall, so we're probably, or like a stone wall. We're going to be viewing it from maybe this close if they're quite large stones. If I increase this to like 5, I literally cannot tell the difference. Or if I go to 16, there is literally no difference from here. You can kind of see between 3 and 4. But only when they're next to each other. Like, right, if you're doing a direct comparison between one and the other, then yeah, you can see that. But generally speaking, you just don't need it. So yeah, if you're optimizing your materials, just make sure that your noise nodes don't have a crazy level of detail. And like here, I'm using them to basically move the edges, right? But I will be adding noise later to distort the surface to make it look more rocky. So in this case, I really don't need them to be super high detail because the edges of these stones, have a look at our reference again, they're not going all over the place. So you can have that down around, what have I got? I've got that at 2 now, and that's fine. And I'm also not using such a strong linear light either. So just put that down there. Sorry that the reference is behind the chat, I've just noticed. Hopefully that's okay. Right, so when I start increasing this color burn to make my mortar lines bigger, like in some places, like around here, I've got the mortar line looking about right, but obviously here now I have this huge gap. But it's not really big enough for any of these stones. So we're going to add another set of stones that goes in the gaps. And we're going to use a really easy method to mask them out. So this color burn, we need the exact point that this color burn changes from a positive value to color burn clamps it, so to 0. And we can't just do we can't just invert this afterwards because everything is exactly 0 here. And we want a little bit more control, because if we were to just basically say, okay, where is this less than, it's not going to be 0, so like a very, very small number. This gives us the area where the mortar is. And if you were to put something in it, imagine you have your rocks, like your little rocks, and they look like this. And imagine that you've just masked them off into this area here, right? So now your rock is going to come to this edge and it's going to make a sheer, abrupt stop. So what we want is, instead of this black and white mask, we want a mask that's got like some fall off on the edge. So if instead of having that kind of square fall off, we want to have something that's more like, it's more like that shape, right? Where the mortar is. So then it'll still be a little bit sharp on the top, but it'll be much neater for like falling off. And also, because we're doing mesh displacement, if you have a 0 to 1 value, or any value to suddenly another value, if you have a shear surface, you're going to get mesh artifacts, shading artifacts, and you're going to see where that mesh is being stretched. So that's one of the things about using adaptive subdivision, is the subdivision happens before the displacement. It's not like it redices it at 1 pixel, one face per pixel after that it's done the displacement as well. Although that would be really useful. It does just stretch. So we can take advantage of color burn being this linear effector, right? So if you have a graph and you've got a gradient and you do a color burn on it, then we're basically making the lower part of it black, and then it's going up to the same point, right? We're just compressing that graph. But this value here is going to be whatever is in the factor, right? So this factor value is this one, right? They're the same. Which means that we can just subtract this map range from that factor value. So I'm just going to take this factor value out. I'm going to use an invert node just to give me a slider. I'm not doing anything fancy. And then I'm also going to take a math node here, and I'm going to take that slider value into the top of the math node set to subtract. I'm going to subtract the map range. So what this has done is it has flipped that map range value because we're subtracting it from a value. But this value, the black point, the edge of that, is going to be the exact same point as for the color burn, but just going in the opposite direction. And also it's not clamped. So we're going to use this one, and I'm going to put not a color ramp, a color dodge afterwards. So we can just, you can see we're just compressing that gradient up And then this is going to be what we use to mask out where our smaller stones are going to go in the gaps. So just to make sure that these two stay together, I'm going to grab a value node. I've just got that on a quick favorite. So that's the scale of the big stones. And we're going to use the same vector input, and it's going to be the same all the way up to the map range, I think. I'm just going to do Control-Shift-D so it brings those inputs with it. And this one we're going to increase the scale to maybe 15. So we'll need to try it in view. Just wondering if maybe because they're smaller we might want less linear light. So I'm also just going to duplicate that down, just so I have separate controls. Cool. So what we need, that's a bit too much. We need to take this color dodge information. So color dodge does it clamps at 1, but everything that is below 1 goes off sort of infinitely. So color burn clamps between 0 and 1. This output is always, it'll clamp to 0, but then it'll also, anything that was going off to 1 and like beyond 1 as well, that will be clamped off at 1. Color dodge clamps at 1, but it doesn't clamp at 0, so anything that was going below will go beyond. So you just need to be aware of that when you multiply something by it, because you're going to be multiplying by a negative value where those black things are, not just by 0. So I can multiply that by that, and then I can take my color burn here, which is my big stones, and I can pick out where the maximum of these big stones and the little stones is. And then that should give me using mix RGB, and I'm going to use color burn again. Am I? Maybe I'm not. Going to use maybe I'm going to color burn the bottom one. And I think I need a higher scale. Okay. Cool. So if we then take this and just have a look at it on a displacement, then we can start to change it again. You should always try and get feedback on what you're working on as quickly as possible. So subdivision, adaptive, simple. I'm going to set my viewport dicing down to 1 pixel. Jump into cycles here, set it to displacement and bump. And a vector displacement into the height, into the displacement. Cool. And let's just view this. Okay, that's actually kind of looking good. Just a little bit too strong. So if we affect our map range here on the bottom one, on our smaller stones, then we're going to be able to control like where our bottom and our top values are, so that it basically just depends where you want to have the front face of the rocks. Like, do you want the big ones to come out as far as the little ones, or do you want them to be further than the little ones? So yeah, you can just adjust this basically. Cool. And because we're using the maximum value here, wherever this color dodge sends something off down to like negative, whatever, a negative value anyway, we're using a clamped, we're doing the maximum against a clamped to 0. So it's always going to take the 0, because the 0 is always going to be higher than a negative number. So out of that pair, it is the maximum value. So that's all the maximum operation is doing. We need to add mortar. That's like the next thing. So rather than just using the black value as our mortar, we're going to height blend, which is not very clever as it sounds. It's just taking another maximum basically. So I'm going to add a noise in here. This noise is going to control the mortar, but it's also going to be the one that we use for the surface of the rocks, because we're going to use a high detail. I only want to have one of these, if possible. Like if you need to, then have two, but in this case, I'm just going to use the one. We're also going to make the noise a little bit more interesting. So let me show you what I mean by that. If I plug the factor into my height of my displacement here, just so that we can just view the displacement. And let's get some lighting in here as well. Just so that we can see what's going on. Cool. So if I increase the height, the detail of this, it's already looking kind of good. But if you take the color, so we can start doing interesting things without really making this any heavier. So take a separate RGB onto the color output of your noise. So now we've got three different versions of the noise. Factor is the same as the red channel. They're identical. But if we were to do something like take a normal math node, and if we take the red value and the green value, and if we do something like logarithm, then that just makes the noise, that kind of makes the noise more interesting. So it's quite cheap, because we're literally just doing like a logarithm operation, and the computer is going to calculate that really, really quickly, versus increasing the scale really high, which is going to be much harder for the computer to like compute that. So I can probably set this down to like 3 or 4 or 5, and just play with some things. Basically, we're using this to be our mortar and our rock surface. So I'm just going to reduce the. Oh yeah, you can see that. So color ramps clamp as well. Color ramps clamp to 0 to 1, because that is the range of the color that we have here, 0 to 1. So if you plug anything into a color ramp, you're going to get a clamped value. So I'm just going to use a map range instead there. Turn off clamping. And I'm just going to bring this down, and just so we've got something a little bit flatter. Just want to double check this is actually worth doing. I think it looks better. There we go. Cool. So that is our general stone surface rough noise look. And we're going to take this and we're going to use it as our mortar. So to use it as mortar, we need to take our height map, and we're going to feed this through as a maximum. So you can just see what happened there. This area just got pulled in as mortar, basically. So if I add another math node in here, you can see that when I change this add value, if I reduce it, then the mortar goes down until it's below 0. If I increase it, then you can see it's coming up through the rock, through the stone there. So that's when people talk about height blending, that's what they're talking about. It's just a way to put one thing on top of another one by virtue of its like displacement value. Cool. And there's a really easy way for us to mask this off for the coloring as well. So we're just going to use difference for that. So just where the stones are, we also need to add some displacement, but I think I'm going to do that with normal. Am I? Yeah, I think I'm going to do that with normal mapping, just because it's, well, I suppose just because it's another process. It'd be easy enough for us to just add that to the rock as well, but it'll be a good exercise in masking. Nice, thank you. Cool. So we want to have colors per rock so that we have variation. Obviously it would be quite easy for us to just say, take a mix RGB and just say like, okay, so the mortar is going to be dark and the stone is going to be kind of brown. We need to find out where the mortar is. So I'm going to find out where it was added by saying like, so this is the value before, this is the value afterwards. Let's find out the difference with a mix RGB and set that to difference. Right, so if I view the output of this and go up high, then you can see that we've got like the numerical the difference between, like truly the distance between the two values. And taking a math set to greater than 0, that is now our mortar mask. So if I change this, you can see that that is changing the position of the mortar, and when we calculate the difference, it's also showing that there is like a different amount there. So if I then chop this onto our mask here, I've got my values back to front, so I'm just going to change this from less than to greater than, or the other way. Oh right, less than just a small value. There we go. Cool. So that is our color for the rocks. It's not anything because it's at the moment every rock is identical. It's looking okay so far, but we need some more variation in here. So our voronois have a value, like they have a color output, right, per stone. And we don't want to use the smooth ones, we want to use the normal ones because they've got a hard fall off. And the fall off is happening where there's mortar. So we're not going to see any changes like on an actual stone. It's always going to be where the mortar is. So if I come over here, so I'm just going to drop my stone texture into the top of this one, set this to multiply. So this is our new stone texture. And I'm going to take the color, so Shift Alt. Oh, you missed the beginning. Okay, let me just have a quick run through so you're not missing out here. Very kind of, it's one of those things which is simple, but only when you know how. So we're just taking our UV map and using linear light to bring in some noise. This is going to give us the variation, like, so it's not just like a straight voronoi. And then we are taking basically a voronoi F1 and a smooth F1, and we are subtracting the smooth from the normal. So the output of this, if I put a greater than just on here, you can see that we're getting this kind of lozenge shape. Whereas if you were to just put that onto, for example, the normal F1, then you're getting them as circles. Or if you were to put them onto a distance to edge, then you would end up with sharp corners. So any of those things might be useful to you if that is what you want. Right, so it's just about having options available. Again, if you were to just do this on the smooth F1, then we're getting like the corners flowing together. So we're using a combination of the two, right? So F1 subtract smooth F1. That's giving us these like nicely rounded corners, which is what we want to mix to match our reference here, where we've got corners coming around like this. And we're using another voronoi. So I've got one with a scale of 5 at the top and one with a scale of 20-ish at the bottom. I've just put these through a map range as well so that they're I'll keep deleting the wrong one. There we go. So rather than it being black in the middle, I'm making it so it's white in the middle. And I'm using this map range to basically flip it and change the scale of that range. So I'm going from 0 to 0.35 instead of 0 to 1. So that's giving us like the fundamental height map for our rocks. And then I'm using a color burn to create mortar gaps. And in parallel to that, I'm subtracting from the factor value here. And this is giving us the inversion into the mortar lines. Just going to multiply that by our voronoi texture here. And that's giving us, basically, instead of just using a greater than here, if I come back up to my diffuse so we can see, you see it's actually quite sheer, so we can affect this a little bit differently. So if we affect our color ramp factor here, just wait for that to compute, you can see that our edges on here, they're much less sheer than when they're really steep. So when they're steep, they're basically like the rock comes up and then it suddenly falls off. But with a lower value, the rock comes up less, but then it falls off much shallower. Could be a scales texture. Yeah, you can use voronoi for so many things. Honestly, like if you just Google like voronoi in nature and it's everywhere, like giraffe necks or like butterfly wings, the veins on flies' wings, the veins on leaves. If you look at the way that lungs grow with like oh my god, I used to know the names of all the different bits, but the way that you have the little like air sacs in the lungs, that's basically voronoi as well. Yeah. Another little trick, if you wanted this to be like a rounded fall off instead of a sheer one, after the color dodge, put a soft light set to white in the bottom and a factor of 1. And it should, yeah. It's just giving us a nice little like roundness on that corner. Oh, no worries. It's nodes are something that's kind of hard to infer meaning later on. So I'd rather people are caught up early. Cool. Actually, that looks loads better. So with a slightly lower dodge value here and a soft light just to round out that corner. I know people like to use RGB curves as well. So you can find RGB curves under color RGB, and you could literally just do that, right? And that's going to give you a round fall off. But I find them a little bit like finicky, trying to get this to not have like you don't think there's going to be a peak, but then you put it on something and there is a peak, and you're trying to like do this, and then it's like coming up and then down, and then you'll step in. It's a pain. So soft light is just the easy way to get guaranteed round. As long as you have a 0 to 1 gradient, it's going to be rounded. Anything less than 0 to 1, and you're going to need to use a color ramp instead, or a curve, RGB curve. And you've only touched on the node series, part 3. Which one's part 3? Is that, I want to say radial array. People kind of told me off when I did the radial array, because especially it's like a part 3 in a allegedly beginner series. Random grids. I think random grids is the second one, maybe. Man, it's been a long time since I started doing them. Yeah, the radial arrays are really useful. And it was like the first thing that I did that I was like, wow, I know enough to like make it up on my own. Because it was the first thing I had like basically worked out with just my head, not looking at other people's work. So yeah, I was just really proud of that. But yeah, releasing that as like number 3 was a bit ballsy, because it's not, I'm basically just throwing trigonometry at people, and that's maybe not a great way to get people to follow you. But hopefully it's useful. Let me just turn on screen shortcuts. There we go. So my shortcuts are going to be bottom left of the 3D viewport. There's a notch up from the previous 2. Yeah, just a little one. So I want to connect the color from my voronoi F1, which has the sharp fall off, right? I want to connect this color to the bottom of this multiply node. So I'm pressing Control, no I'm not, I'm pressing Alt Shift, right clicking, and that's giving me this blue connector. And then I can just drag that over. It's going to ask me where I want to come from, so color, and going to color 2. You know, I just saw 2 extra sockets there. So if I connect like that, it's asking me if I want to come from W or radius as well, even though we don't have those sockets. Interesting. Is it a bug? I feel, are these like available sockets in the other ones? Is it distance to end sphere radius? Okay. So it is actually a thing. Wait, so if I look at this, then we're getting a different value. Okay, so this is when we can see the noodle. Sorry, I know this is like a bit of a diversion. I'm just curious what's going on now. Oh, and then it's gone away. Okay, so it's not actually connected, but it just thinks it has. Look at that, that's really buggy. Okay. Cool. Well, so I've just brought this back to, yeah, being an F1 voronoi 2D. Definitely a node wrangler bug. This is why node wrangler is not enabled by default, because it's got things in it that do not work ideally. I guess I hadn't found them until now. Even the bool tool has bugs, does it? I don't actually use bool tool. Is it any good? I see quite a lot of people using it. I've started using hard ops and box cutter as well, and man, do they crash 2.9 a lot. Like sometimes I'll just be trying to like, hard ops is really good in 2.83, but 2.9 is just not stable enough. So God, I'll like try and do a rectangle boolean to just like the basic box cutter box cutting, and it just like crashes to desktop straight away. Real pain. Cool. So gotta find a way to, so our major stones are now like individually colored, which is great, but our minor stones in here, these need to have their own colors. At the moment they are divided by the color of the big ones. Not ideal. So we need to mask between them. And the way to do this is we have a color burner here. Also the subtract. Really anything where one is above and the other is below 0 is going to work great for us here. So I'm just going to take the, oh, just got something in my eye, bear with. Oh. I'm just going to take the color dodge here, add a math node and set this to greater than 0. That's really all you have to do. And then I'm just going to mask that here. So this is now the mix factor of a mix node set to mix. The mortar lines are white, which means that socket 1 versus black, which is socket 0. I know that they're called color 1, color 2, but it's better to think about them as socket 0 and socket 1 instead. So I'm just going to connect the color from that bottom row up here. So now you can see that we've got our major stone color and our minor stone color split where the mortar line is there. This is coming in, and then this mix is also splitting it where the mortar is around all of the stones. And now we have individual colors per stone. So that's controlled on this multiply. You don't need it too high, you just need it to be like your brain understands that there's differences. Kind of hard to pick a base color, but yeah, so now we've got individual colored stones and individual colored mortar. So instead of using a diffuse, I'm going to use a principled node. I know a lot of people don't like the principled node because it's not completely accurate, and you should be doing everything with like a diffuse, a glossy, a refraction, and Fresnel, and mixing it all yourself. But honestly, that is a pain in the arse. So I just use the principled node. It's good enough, and it does, like, you can get really good results with the principled node. It's just maybe not the best one to use for glass or things like that. So I think my mortar's too thick, so I'm going to subtract from this add node. I don't want the stones to be actually touching each other. There we go, that's fine. Cool. So we want not really any roughness, so turn that all the way up. Oh yeah, we want roughness. And we don't want much specular. The important thing that we want is normal. So we're going to add a normal, a vector bump node here. Just going to plug that straight in. And we're going to take our noise and we're going to mask it onto the stones, which we're going to use. So this is our mortar mask. We're going to do we're just going to use that basically. Just going to mix it here. So that is the factor. White is our stone, so we're going to put the logarithm version. No, we're not, because the logarithm version is our mortar. So I'm just going to take the blue channel and just use that instead. Basically just so that you don't get to the edge of a rock and then you can see that the bump is continuing exactly the same into the mortar. It just gives you a bit of variation. I'm going to set my mix factor on here just so it's about the same, but it's not actually adding any bump. So that's like a uniform in color 1, and then I'm just putting this out into the color. If we view this, then you can see that we're starting to get that bump on the surface. The bump distance on the bump node is in meters, worth remembering. So just set that to something appropriate, so like 0.05 or something, so it's about 5 millimeters. Or is that centimeters? That'd be centimeters, wouldn't it? So 5 centimeters, I guess. What does log do? That's a good question. I don't actually know. I feel like that's something embarrassing for me to be admitting, even though I'm using it. Logarithm. So log b of y, the output would be, oh right, so it gives you what the power of one thing would be to get to the other thing. Yeah, Matisse, you can answer that one. You know more about this than I do. Yeah, basically math happens and it looks better. That's how I think about it. Transforms a space, so small numbers are big and big numbers are smaller. I like it. It works really well for the noise. Like, I've started using this as noise for everything. So like, it just looks so much better. I use it for like ground textures a lot. Let me show you a ground texture. This is really easy and fun to do. So add a plane. We're just going to add just going to run through this quickly. So noise, texture, color output, converter, separate, XYZ, and then we're just going to add a converter math node on there. Set that to log. So now we've got that output. And if we add a map range on here, I'm just going to set this to displacement and have a subdiv on here. I know it's really confusing or like jarring when I make that big. It's just because I like having my side things small. So there we go. This goes into a displacement, height displacement. And I'm going to need a principal node on here. And don't want to clamp it. Increase the detail. I'm going to set the mid-level to 0 there so I can see how much higher this is. I'm just going to go 0 to 1 on the output, but make sure that my input values are changed. And with a scale of 1 in your output, you can also know, that your maximum displacement is 1 meter. So basically the bottom of this wall here, this is how high our displacement should end up. So if I increase this, there we go. Cool. So that's a better range for our surface there, and I can now reduce it on the displacement node. And using a color ramp, I can clamp off some of the bottom, right, so that we've got puddles. Puddles are always fun. And then we're just going to use this to set our 3 blue 1 brown. Yeah, 3 blue 1 brown is great. If you don't know his channel, if you want to learn things about math, or especially vector math. Also, this is a really interesting video he did on, I'm pretty sure it was him, did the proof of a torus. See that one? Yeah. This is really interesting. In fact, I'm just going to link you to that. It's a really good video. Even if you're not interested in maths, just watch it, it's really interesting. Yeah. Where was I? So I can put a mix RGB and a math node on here. So set this to be greater than 0. That's going to give me my mask between mud and not mud, like mud and water. And I can go for a muddy color, the sort of desaturated dark red. And then my watercolor is going to be the same but slightly brighter, slightly more yellow. Around like that. And then we also want to set the value here for our roughness as well. So you can really quickly start getting actually really nice results by using it. And I just feel like the kind of results that you get from using the log method on this noise output are a lot more interesting than just taking the noise by itself, because you're getting a lot more variation in a way that seems quite natural, that I don't think you get when you just stretch the noise. If just using a higher displacement scale. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it does nothing. I just think it looks cool. Anyway, that was a bit of an aside there. So, just need to find our displacement again. Cool. So here we are with rocks that kind of maybe slightly look like rock. And yeah, just using noise for the surface because I think it's cheaper. I know the bump node is, I don't know, kind of renowned for being a bit heavy, but I think actually doing surface displacement where it's having to calculate your surface BVH, however it's called, I don't know if there's a difference between a very simple displacement and a very complicated displacement. Like if it's calculating the surface already. I haven't actually tested that, so that might be interesting for a future project. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff about optimization that I don't really have grips with. Cool. So I think the smaller rocks need to be a little bit bigger as well. So I'm just going to set this down to 10. Just so you're infilling a little bit better, maybe 15. Cool. So the wall that we're going to build today has a couple of different walls, and it's also got like a, is it called wattle and daub? You know, where you've got like the slats and you put the clay and the horsehair on top of it. And also timber frames. So a few extra things for us to go through. This is part 1. Let's do the big blocks at the bottom now. So I'm just going to frame this up. Gonna frame it up to here. Actually no, I'll mix it afterwards. So I'm going to frame the whole thing. So I'm going to do mix shaders instead of mix colors. Normally when I do a shader like this, I use one principled node and I do all of my masking and use mix nodes before that. I think it's cheaper than mixing shaders, but also mixing shaders can be a lot easier, like to get your head around. So this is our voronoi stone. I just pressed F2 to bring that node label editor up. Just going to bring that up there. So the next one we're going to do is based on the bricks, but it's basically got a little bit of additional variation. So another UV map. Just going to disconnect this displacement as well. So if you haven't gone through the brick tutorial, then this might be a little bit quick, but just because that video is already out there, I'm going to rush through this one a little bit. So I'm just doing scale, separate. This is giving me my individual rows, which I can isolate or create a mask basically with a modulo node here. This is actually not what we want to do. So I'll show you, I'll just run through up to where oh yeah, oh my god, I haven't saved. Thank you. Oh my god, that always happens. I need like an alarm. I need an alarm to remind me to save. Ridiculous. Okay, so modulo at 2. This is how we did it in the tutorial. And then less than 1. And then adding this to our x value. And then modulating the x value. So adding a modulo there. If I set this to 2, then we have like a 1 unit, a single unit offset. This video will, yeah, I'm recording it. And a few people were asking about doing stone walls and things, so I'm just going to upload it raw as you watch it here as well. So yeah, if you can't make the whole thing, then don't worry. So if you want to use a wider brick, like a 3 wide brick, then you're going to need to multiply your less than here. Because at the moment this is a 0 and 1. So if you add, so I'm adding 0 here, and I'm adding 1 here. Right? So then when I modulate it, this one starts at 0 and goes up to, if I set that to 2, that's going up to 2 here. I should just write that. 2. And so it's always going 0 to 2, because that's what modulo is doing. But every other row is starting at 1. So that's why they get basically shifted this direction. So if we wanted to have wider stones, like 3 wide, then instead of adding 1, you need to be adding 1.5, because you want that 50% offset. I'm not using a scalar math node, we're using a vector math node. So the difference is, I know a lot of you know this, but I had a few questions about it, and I realised I'd never actually spoken about scalar and vector before. So vectors, this is the easiest way to explain this. So individual lines of information are scalar, right? So just black and white information. And then a combination, in this case 3 lines, we use X, Y, and Z in vectors in Blender. You can also get vector 2s, which are just X and Y, or in coordinate space, that would be U and V. So that's why we call it a UV map, because it's got a U axis and a V axis. If you move into 3 dimensions, then you get a UV and a W. Fun little bit of trivia. So vector math nodes, when you do an operation to a vector, right? So like let's do an output here. Like 1 plus 1, 0.5 plus 0.5 is going to equal 1 in our X vector, right? Just like that. And that information is kept separate, right? The X is kept separate from the Y and the Z, and the same for the Y and the same for the Z. They're all 3 individual bits of information. They're being calculated individually. You can also do more things with vector math. So you can also do a dot product or a cross product, or like any of these ones, basically. Also length and distance, normalize. They do things which consider all of the entire vector, right? So like dot product is X multiplied by X plus Y multiplied by Y plus Z multiplied by Z. And that is why when you go to dot product, you consider the output is a grey socket. It's a scalar value that's being output because it's no longer a vector information. So if we want to be using a vector math node here, she's going to have our brick size in it. So I'm going to add a combine XYZ there. So our bricks are 3 wide and 1 high. If we're using that information, and we need another combine here, then I need to find my Y value, and that is we're just going up linearly, right? So that's not changed at all. We haven't done anything to that, so we can just take the original Y and drop that in. We need to have our... So this is where we're going to start changing things up. Are we? Let's just make the bricks first, and then I'll start changing it. So we're just going to subtract half of the brick size so that we can center our space. So I'm just going to scale our brick size here down to 0.5, connect that up. So now we've centered 0, 0 in the middle of each brick. Taking an absolute here. This basically says whenever you have a graph that looks like this, roughly, anything which is in a negative space is going to become positive. I mean, it's a little bit more complicated actually, because I'm using a vector math one here, right? So if I had this graph and I did an absolute to it, the graph would actually look like that. Is that right? I think it's right. So it keeps the same gradient, but it essentially bounces around inside the positive quadrant. And that's why we have the same quadrant, but it'll be mirrored in each section. Why am I teaching maths? I am not qualified for this. Okay, so we've got our absolutes here, and I'm going to separate X, Y, Z, and I'm going to do a math smooth minimum. Smooth. Oh wait, it's been a few days since I did this. Great math teacher, thank you. I hope what I'm teaching is correct, that's all. After the absolute. So at the moment we have 0, 0 point in the middle, and we need and it's going up, right? It's going up as it goes out. We need to be happening the opposite. So you know how we were talking before about if you subtract a gradient from 1 or from any value, you get a you basically invert that gradient, right? So if I take the UV map and I take just the x component of that, if you were to subtract that from 1, then you're basically saying, right, so subtracting this from 1, if you have a value of 0, 1 minus 0 is 1, and then all the way across until you get to 1, so 1 minus 1 is 0. So it's basically going to invert it, right? It's going to flip it around, in this case 0.5. So we're basically doing the exact same thing. We're taking the size of our brick halved, because that is this distance, and we are subtracting our gradient from that, and that's giving us the brick reaching a 0, 0 point at the outside of the brick shape, which is then what we need to do the smooth minimum. You don't really need to know what smooth does, but it's basically doing maths to round stuff. If you have overlapping gradients, you can do a smooth operation on them and it will round it. So it's just quite good for getting like stylized tiles and things like that. And it just looks kind of nice and friendly. Cool. Last thing before we go back, I'm just going to do a rotate. So I'm going to take our subtracted vectors here, so like the centered ones, vector rotate. Just drop that on the correct noodle there. So if I rotate this, then you can see rotation basically, unless you explicitly say otherwise, the rotation is going to be centered around 0, 0. So that's one of the reasons that we wanted to subtract our vectors there, just so that we center our space. And this means that if we have a random value per brick, then that's going to allow us to have a random rotation per brick, because we can just plug that value into the vector rotate. So if I take this modulo, Control Shift D, and then set it to snap, it's taking the brick size in, so it's snapping at the location of each brick. So I can then take a white noise and plug that into the plug the value, which outputs 0 to 1, like an even range of values between 0 and 1. These are going in radians, so 0 to 1 radians is around about 0 to 60 degrees. Map range, I'm just going to set this to minus 0.1 to 0.1. So it's a very small range that we're actually moving it there. There we go. I'm just going to jump into Eevee just so that we can do this live. There we go. Cool. So what we've done so far is we've got bricks which are half offset. I want bricks which are randomly offset. So the way for us to do this is for us to take each row. So I'm going to take taking our y component, right, from our original vector, our scaled vector anyway. And if I just snap this into rows of 1, then we have like a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And then if I put that through a white noise, which is just on the texture one here, I use it all the time. So if you can right click and click add to quick favorites. So I've just always got it on Q. So I'm just going to take this random value, and then this is going to be our offset. So I'm going to put a multiply on here, and I'm just going to, instead of using this modulo less than multiply, we're going to use a snap white noise multiply. So now if we come to the end, you can see that now all of our stones are like, they're being offset randomly. And you can use this multiply to increase. We're using modulo, so anything below 0 is going to appear black. It's not actually black, it's just below 0. It's doing the same, but it's in the negative space. So just make sure you're multiplying by a positive value there. I'm just going to give something big. 25, that'll probably be fine. And just at the end here, I'm going to add a color burn. Quick questions. Are quick favorites different for different workspaces? Yes, they are. So in my texture workspace, I have a whole bunch of nodes. So texture coordinate, value, noise, voronoi, white noise, mix, RGB, color ramp, math, vector math, and map range. They're just useful to have. And then in my 3D viewport, I have show overlays, update all, which is a sphere chalk thing, append, because I work with a lot of external assets and like bring them into scenes, transparent film, which is like a so if I was in rendered view here, you can see it makes the world go transparent. I also have subdiv and auto smooth. If you have like the standard Blender key maps, you can just do like, I think it's Control 2 or something like that, and it'll give you 2 levels of subdivision. I learnt Blender on a laptop, so I have a PC now, but I spent years like teaching myself to use Blender with the emulated keypad, which basically makes the number row, the alphanumeric numbers, it makes them into your view, like 3 and 5 and 7 and 1. It makes them your standard views on the key, like the number row. Yeah, so that's why I've got a quick favorite for that. Also, you have a different one if you're in edit mode. Your quick favorites are then different as well. So I've got like this lets me show edge length or merge by distance, which I do quite a lot as well. So yeah, every workspace has its own quick favorites, and they're really, really, really useful. So I definitely recommend setting them up. You can always change them later, so it's not like you're forced into using them once you've set them. So I'm just setting a color burn, so I've got some mortar line control and color dodge. Like this is what happens every time I make anything: color burn, color dodge, and also soft light because I want round corners. There we go. Yeah, cheaper ways to do it than soft light, but soft light is the easiest. Cool. So rather than the bricks just being offset, but all being the same size, I want to have a way to change the size of the brick. But I still need it to fit within the main, like the major grid. So if I could have a brick that was half as high, or a third as high, and the same horizontally, right? I could have it half as wide or a third as wide. Any smaller than that is going to look really stupid. Excuse me. Yeah, just because you're going to have too much of a range of stone sizes. And the illusion that we're trying to create here is that we have cut stones, like properly dressed stone, and it's unlikely that you would have like tiny, tiny little splinters of rock in with big slabs of rock. So I basically need to mask out where our stones are, right? Which I have on this white noise node. So we're going to start working in a little bit of a circle here. So in this region, we're going to start creating, because we've got our combine XYZ here, which is setting the stone size. But now we're going to start using our white noise output here to govern. So if I take a math node and put it on here, I'm just going to pull it up to the top so we're working somewhere else. So you can see I now have a threshold for saying where we've got like stones which are half width, stones which are half height. For ease, I might just make it so they're like half width and half height. I think that's probably the easiest way. So yeah, I can just come over here. I'm just going to pull those out of the way a little bit. Yeah, apologies. I'm going to be doing a little bit of thinking live, which is not always the fastest way of working. Yeah, so I basically want to have, I think, a multiply here. Right, so I'm taking my brick size, which is 3 or 1, 3 by 1. And I need it to change it basically. So it's either like 1.5 by 0.5 or 1.5 by 1, or you get the idea. So it's some factor of that brick size, but it can. We don't want it to be we don't want it to be like halves, right? So we don't want any half bricks. So we don't want it to be like 2/3 of a brick here, and then a half brick, because what will actually happen is, where we're doing a smooth here, what will end up happening is we'll get a rounded corner for like one brick, the one that we can see all of, but the other one would be rounded at one end and then it would just get cut off. So we need it to always be entire bricks. And then I'm going to, yeah, so I want to be, I'm just trying to think of what the best way to do this is. So I think basically dividing our brick size by 2 or 3 or 1, right? It can be 1 as well if the brick size is not changing. So I'm going to change this to divide. I'm going to take another combine XYZ up here. And that you can, if you select an object, or if you select a node, sorry, best illustrated with a color ramp. So if you've done something to a color ramp and you like, oh, I want to change it, or I want to get another color ramp if I want to duplicate it, you can just select it and press backspace. That's going to go back to the defaults. So yeah, so taking our brick size and we are dividing it by between 0 and 3, no, between 1 and 3, for, and separately for X and Y. Yeah, so I need 2 random values. I have an RGB output from the white noise texture. So I can grab a converter, separate RGB. There we go. So now we've got R, G, and B. We are using the value output here, which is the same as the R channel. So I'm already using the R channel for this map range. So that's what's rotating the rocks. So we want to use 2 different ones. So we're going to use green and blue, right? And that's going to be into our X and into our Y. So this vector is now different, but we want it to be between, we want it to either be 1, 2, or 3. At the moment, we just have random values between 0 and 1. So if I guess use a map range here, and if I change this to stepped linear, so at the moment we have 0 to 1, we want it to be 1 to 3 in 2 steps. Is that right? Is the steps the changing in between, or is the steps the actual steps? I always find that so confusing, because like you take a step, don't you? Where you've gone from one place to another. Very confusing. I'm assuming it means 3 steps is 3 separate bits. So I'm just going to put that on both of here. So we're basically saying an input from 0 to 1 is being changed to an output of 1 to 3 in 3 steps. And we're doing step linear, so they're even size steps. So it should be 1, 2, and 3. You can check that with a math node set to greater than. So if we go to like 0.9. So as soon as we've gone past 1 there, then these ones you can see we're a value of 1, and then we can keep going up past I see. So it should be 2 steps. There we go. So that one's a value of 3. They're a value of 2. These ones are a value of 1. Great. So the step is the changing between things, not the step itself. Cool. I'm just going to hide the top one, but they are both the same if you need to check that. Right, so that is dividing it by a random value, basically. So now you can see that our outputs here, some of them are narrow and wide and low. Some of them are, these ones look like it's 3 by 3. Got all sorts going on. So now if you go to the end, you can see that your bricks, you have a lot more randomness in here. I also want to change the rotation amount here so that we're not doing all of it all the time. So change this to mix, put your map range into the bottom, and color 1 is black. So that we're basically saying 0 output. Cool. So a slightly more interesting way to do this would have been to have different amounts. So you could have like a wide long one and then 2 narrower ones on top. Starts to get a little bit more confusing though. So I'm just going to leave that one off for now. But if you wanted to work that one out, you are very welcome to. It just takes a little bit more masking. You can't do it in one step like this. So these are the positions of our bricks, our stones, and we just need to actually make them into stones, right? So I'm just reducing the smoothing, can give them a little bit more mortar, and then we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to do, we're going to find out where we've got our mortar, right, which is this up here. I'm going to bring that down. I'm going to need a different add node because I'm going to be height mixing, height blending differently. I'm going to put this into a frame and just call it mortar. And we can change the color of that frame in here. There we go. Just so that we can keep an eye on where it is. So this is generally like our height map. So I can just add the displacement node, set that to the height. And then we're going to bring in a principled node. Obviously much too high on here. 5.1, something like that. Increase my color dodge so I've got a flat top on all of them. Cool. Right, I am going to make sure that my height is proportional to my scale. So at the moment we have a scale of 5. I'm just going to take a reroute node with the scale. No, I'm not. I'm going to add a value in here to be our scale value. I'm going to just set that to 5, so it's the same as. And I'm just going to take another. If you ever need to disconnect or move a reroute around like this, so if you've got it on a noodle and you just want it to come off, you can hold Alt when you left click on it, because obviously if you just click on it, you'll get a string coming out of noodle. So I'm just taking my value here, attached to a reroute. I'm going to pull that to the end. I'm going to add a math node set to divide. So we're doing the reciprocal here. So it's important that you put your scale value into the bottom of your divide node, and that goes into the scale. So at the moment it's a scale of 1. So something over 5 equals 0.1 is going to be 0.5. So that's good, 0.5 divided by 5. So if you need to change your displacement scale, you now do it on this divide node. I always make my mortar joints too deep. But we're height blending actually, so I don't need to do it here. Cool, so that's done. I'm just going to now increase my scale now I've got that proportional. No worries, Nutaki. Hope you're good. Hope you have a good night, mate. I know this is running on a little bit. So this is our general like stone pattern. We just need to color it, basically. So finding out where our modulo node is, and I can go Control-Shift-D, change this to snap. So this is going to give us a snap value per brick. I can just add a white noise node on here. I'm just going to set this to 1D. We don't need all of the colors, but you can see that this is properly like where the actual stones are, whereas the previous one is where the entire like the cell in which the stones can be is. So this is going to be our color variation. So mix RGB, put this into the bottom, get yourself a stone color, and then we're just multiplying it. Just to give us a little bit of variation. Something like that. We also need to know where our mortar is as well, right? So roughness up, specular down. Our mortar is wherever the soft light value is less than, or is 0, right? So math node greater than, set this to greater than 0, and now we have a mask between mortar and not mortar. You could use the hue saturation, the HSL node. Yeah, you could actually. You mean taking this this value? Hue saturation. Yeah, you could put it. Actually, you could just put it into a factor like that, right? So you've got your if you take a sort of general stone texture, stone color, and you work out like the maximum difference. Oh, a map range into the hue slot. Ah. Yeah, that's good actually. The way I was thinking is that you would take keep things on a palette. Yeah. I mean, another way to keep things on a palette, I mean like literally a palette, is with a color ramp set to constant, right? So if I just add a bunch of flags in here, you can evenly distribute them from the left. Go from the left so that we have that top one as well. And now we can just start putting colors on here. And I can just change this around a little bit. So I'm basically just actually defining like explicitly a palette of colors that we can have. And the white noise node is good because it has an evenly distributed range out of the value socket between 0 and 1. Whereas if you just use like a noise node, you've got like between 0.3 and 0.7 with a bias towards 0.5. So if I was to plug that in, now you've got like explicitly the colors that you want for different bricks. which might be one way to do it. The way that you were doing it with the hue saturation is a really good way of doing it as well, because it makes it automated, and it also makes it socketed, whereas the color ramp doesn't have sockets for each flag. So you could control your map range a lot more, like particularly. Yeah, other variations for saturation differences. I kind of like that one more actually. So taking the color, just going to put a separate XYZ on there. You can use separate RGB and separate XYZ interchangeably, but if you plug a vector, a blue XYZ vector, into a grey scalar socket, it's going to do X plus Y plus Z divided by 3. It's going to take an average. If you do the yellow RGB socket into a grey scalar socket, then it's going to do like red times 0.235, whatever it is. It's like a color space specific conversion. So yellow into blue is fine, it doesn't change it at all. But yellow into grey and blue into grey, they're different outcomes. So just be careful when you do that. Yeah, okay. So I'm just taking this 3 different noise patterns and 3 map ranges. So I'm going to take Y and Z. So I've got my general color. We're going to give it some hue variation. Nothing too extreme. So I'm just going from 0.45 to 0.55, where 0.5 is our original color. Saturation. Oh, nice. Okay, thanks for sharing that. This is great. I love how you get to do like the, like how impressionists use color, like with the little color variation stuff. What do they call it? Color vibrations. Converted you from color ramps. That's a good thing. The shame of color ramps. You can make your own color ramps, like kind of make your own color ramps. So I've got a gradient map one. It's not really a gradient map exactly. It's just map ranges. So this lets you have like color inputs. And it lets you like set the flags, but this only works for a left, right, and a center flag. Just like using levels in Photoshop. More expensive or less expensive than color ramps? I want to say probably about the same. Well, I want to say less expensive for linear. It's probably pretty close though, because it's doing a fair, well, it's doing a reasonable amount of maths to actually do the changing. At least it's doing like an add and a multiply anyway. Whereas obviously we have smooth and smoother, and they're a bit more computational. If you're using a color ramp, you've got potentially a lot of stuff going on. You know, you can have a lot of stops for a start, and you can also have so like constant fall off is probably quite cheap compared to ease, ease. But then you've also got things like HSV, where we can like these are really functional. You know, if you have like red, if I do that, you can see that we get a full spectrum. And you're outputting color as well. So you're outputting a vector. Even if your color ramp is grayscale, it will be outputting a vector. It's just that each of the XYZ of each, the XYZ is going to be like the same, hence being grayscale. And yeah, map range is a scalar. So I guess my gut feeling is that color ramps are more computationally expensive. But probably not by a huge amount. And it depends how you set it up as well. I would, like, honestly, for most materials, I would just go with whatever's easiest. If you're making a material which is so heavy that you need to think about optimization, yeah, then I guess you would think about optimization then. But there are some things that you can come back to and fix. Yeah, map ranges are useful, as like so useful. You can also like clamp stuff as well. And it's clamping it to your max min output. Yeah, your 2 max and 2 min. So that lets you set your clamp range. Super handy. Okay, let me just put one on the value as well here. What was our default? Default was 1. So I'm going to go from 0.9 to 1.1. Is that going to break energy conservation? No, that seems good. Oh wait, yeah. Definitely breaks energy conservation. Cool. So this is how we've set up our color. If you put it into the diffuse as well, so you can illuminate stuff with just base color if your base color is high enough. So if I just plug a value into here and I set this to like 100, if I put this, you can see this is actually literally being lit by the surface, even though it's not an emission surface. Just because our value is so high here. Yeah, so it's worth at least being aware of energy conservation. And if in doubt, you can always just clamp your last step and it'll clamp it to 0 to 1, which is another potential solution. We should be using these things. Well, we're going to have more. There's quackles here. I won't say too much, but I think there's going to be more. Oh, what was the word I was looking for? Like challenge stuff with like restrictions. Yeah, they're really good to do as well. The challenges with restrictions, they really make you think about how you're working. It's going to reduce the factor of this slightly. Cool. So I just need to add the displacement from our mortar. So using an add, this is going to be our like height position so that we can make sure that we fine tune it properly. Just going to bring that down here. And looking at where we're doing this. So that's our scale, isn't it? So I'm just going to use a math node set to maximum. I'm going to put the greater than in here. It's just taking a sec. Oh, do you know what? I think I'm still in CUDA. I am. I changed it over to CUDA because I was doing stuff with bevel. And damn, CUDA is slow compared to optics. You literally just always end up waiting for it. Just make sure this is actually working correctly. I think around that should be fine. I just don't want my mortar lines to be too deep. And you can see actually when I've increased my mortar level, we're getting some of the brick color coming onto the mortar. So I'm just going to use this greater than to cinch in the threshold there. Great. Cool. And same again, just going to put some normal into the end. No worries. Yeah, remember to save. Thanks for coming by. Maybe she's gone. Yeah, sorry, I know this one's God, we're heading on for 2 hours now. Sorry about this, guys. Right, factor bump. Going to be throwing in our value here from our blue channel. Easy way to do that again is just Shift Alt right click and drag, and we're going from blue into height. Wow, look, we have extra sockets again, dx and d height x and height y. Is this just hidden sockets? No. Weird. Doesn't seem to do anything anyway. Cool, so bump into the normal. And we're just going to make sure that we are properly masking off our texture, which is going to be the mortar mask, right? So this one. So mix RGB just before there. Drop that on. We are mixing onto the stones, which is socket 1. And we're putting a flat color into socket 0. Something like that is fine. I might just increase my detail here. I'm just going to go slightly higher, just to give us more detail. I think around 7 is fine. Cool, so this is our brick texture. This one ended up quite long as well. Control J. This is the bricks. I'm just going to do a couple more things. So luckily these last ones were a bit quicker. So just working at the top here now. I'm going to take a UV map. Get rid of that displacement as well. So this is, we're going to do a timber frame. Right, so I'm going to scale this twice so that we've got like a taller stack. And I'm just going to unwrap it again. So hopefully you're here for the Tudor. Yeah, it's kind of mock though. It's not authentic, and we're not doing any joinery. Just kind of faking it. Let's get rid of our reference now. This is now twice the size it is wide, so just want to take that and make it half as wide, and just drag it over there. So now we have like 0 to 0.5 in our X direction. Here for the Tudor-esque. Right, so for us to put a frame around here, just get rid of that output so we can see. So I want to have like a frame, top and bottom. It's going to be bricks at the bottom here. And then we're going to put in 2 uprights. And have a couple of like square end of beams on the corner with end grain. And we're just going to do like a real cheap procedural wood on this as well. Yeah. So we can basically, these are the same distance out from each direction in the X gradient, and this is the same direction, same distance in the Y gradient. they may or may not end up the same as each other. And those 4 corners, they're all going to be the same, and all the wood's going to be the same. Nice and easy. So if we take our UV map, and we want to find our center at the top. So I'm just going to add a vector math, subtract. So this is now 0.5 wide instead of being 1 wide because we shrunk it because we're going taller. So if I subtract 0.5, that's going to go up halfway. I guess 0.75 in the Y and 0.25 in the X. So that's more or less centered in that top quadrant, or I guess top half. We want to move things out in each direction, and we're masking it. We're just doing like a black and white mask, so nothing complicated. We want it to go in the same direction, both directions, sorry, the same amount. So we're going to use an absolute. We can then do another subtract. So if I increase the subtraction here, then you can see that our 0 point is moving out. If I then do another absolute afterwards, then you can see that right, so we've just done UV subtract absolute, and that's allowing us to position essentially a square. I'm going to set the thickness of our planks now. Mixed RGBs can take vector inputs and output a vector, so I'm just going to do it in here. So we're going to color burn a little bit. So this is setting the thickness of our beam. And then we can separate and we can start masking off our actual beams. So separate XYZ. So we've got X and we've got Y. And we're just going to go greater than 0 in both of these. Great, so that's both of those. And then I want to isolate the corners as well. How do we do that? We basically need it to be where they're both the same. So I could just add and then clamp it. And there we go, that's got the corners as well. So the order for us to do this is going to be making the wood for the upright and horizontal, and then put the wood for the corners on top of that, because it's just going to cover it. We're not like working around it. And I can increase this color burn to increase the thickness of my timber frame. Cool. We're going to be working with noise here. So noise texture. We're just doing stretch noise. Stretch noise is the easiest way to do a vaguely serviceable wood. So I'm going to take a vector math coming off our UV. So this is unstretched, and we're going to set this to be multiplying. So the lower we make this, the more stretched in that axis it gets. So obviously we want horizontal wood and we want vertical wood. I'm just wondering if it would be easy for us to make a vector that does that. I was thinking of basically doing horizontal wood and then vertical wood separately. But if we're working with noise, I want to keep my computation down as low as possible. So instead of doing 2 noise textures, one for horizontal, one for vertical, I want to do one noise texture that does both horizontal and vertical. So I need to mask out my input vector instead of the noise. So if I have a mix RGB here, this is going to be our 2 vectors. we can just use the uprights, right, as our mix factor. And we're just going to create, two vectors now. So convert, combine X, Y, Z. And we're just going to plug this in as our color 1. And another one is our color 2. So our verticals need to be stretched in the y-axis. So we're going for 1 in X and 0.2. This might change. And the other one as well is going to be the opposite. So 0.2 and 1. I want all my wood to be affected together. So I'm just going to plug into those 0.2s just so I can control the stretch together. So now when I look at the wood texture, cool. Needs to be a bit lower. Something like that. Great. That's actually worked really well. So you can just put I'm just going to use a color ramp so that we have the easy control. It's not really procedural because it's on flags instead of sockets. But I'm just going to set the colors and leave it, so that's fine. And I'm going to set slightly lighter color, a little bit more saturated. Cool. So that is our cheap wood. And now we just need to have the ends of our logs right on these positions. We have this absolute already, and it would also work for the subtract. We're going to be making a circle, so I think it's fine. So I'm just gonna take this subtract output, which is giving us the 4 corner positions. I'm going to mix this linear light with some of this color. Oh, that's a lot. So this is giving us the variation. Nothing crazy. Just like around about 0.01-ish. I think looks okay. And then we're going to add a wave texture. And we're going to change it from bands to rings in the z-axis. So this is just giving us rings based on the positions. You can see there's a bit of stepping between the horizontal stretch in the middle and the vertical stretch on the side. This is fine because we're going to be masking onto the side anyway. So I'm just going to increase this scale. Let's just have a look at where we're doing this. So mix color goes in here. I guess we're going to be coloring the end grain as well the same. So we can pass that also through here. Which I can do like that. And then taking our end pieces here. So our mix factor. Just needs to be the other way. There we go. So then that all goes through the color ramp together. Cool. So I was thinking we're going to have to do something to this, but it's looking kind of okay. Might go for a sawtooth, which is slightly more accurate for trees because they like go out and then they stop and then they go out again, so they have like fast growth and slow growth. We could always just change. I might just change the value of this, just add slightly. Just to make it a bit more, I don't know, a bit more like what I want, I think. Can increase this as well. And I'm going to increase the stretch. So much of working with nodes is just tweaking. There we go. Cool. Yeah, so again, we're going to be mixing our shaders, so I'm just going to make this one into a principled shader. We can maybe have a little bit of specularity on this one actually. We don't want it to be completely flat. I might just mix this using color ramp on this, so I can set my roughness. So yeah, I know we were talking about color ramp and map range before. Color ramps are just so useful as an artist, you know, because you can be very explicit, like, oh, I want this bit to be grey and I want the other bit to be like 0.2 or whatever. So it allows you to have a lot of very fine control and do things in like a non-linear transformation of a gradient. So you can just, yeah, make it exactly how you want. So they are really useful still, even if they're not super procedural. Hey, I'm in. How's it going? I've been seeing some of your work popping up recently. It looks amazing. Cool. So I'm going to throw in a normal as well. Oh, sorry, a bump into the normal. And again, we're just taking that same mix node. Cool. So that's how we're going to leave the wood stuff. We will be masking it with, actually I just need to make a mask of these, don't I? So I'm just going to take a multiply here. So there we go, that's the mask that we'll be using ultimately. Yeah. Yeah, that is the one that we'll use. I will just invert it because we're going to use the, we need it to be coming out from the wall, right? So I was just wondering about, because we're using greater than, which is giving us this shear fall off. And obviously you want to have gradients as much as possible so you don't break your geometry. You could go back here and use like a color dodge to set your fall off size, and then use like a minimum. Yeah, minimum node, and then invert it. Should we do that? Yeah, maybe. So just taking the color burn output. It's just to avoid fall off artifacts. So we're going to have this so it's not completely sheer, and then separate XYZ on this, and set this to minimum. So there we go. So we're not getting a completely hard fall off on that. Is this something that we want to have up here as well? Could be, could be. So yeah, I'm just replacing these masks with the ones that have fall off instead. It's just like a more proper way to do things. Try to not use greater thans if possible. If you're working with stuff that's supposed to look natural. So hopefully this still looks okay. Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good. Cool. Right, so this maximum is our mask, and then we're just going to put the displacement on here. So inverting it with the subtract node, factor displacement into the, subtract into the height. And I'm just going to do that properly. So there we go. So you can see if we set our color dodge all the way up to 1 here, we're getting artifacts on the sides where it's basically going from 0 to 1 with no warm-up. There you go, you'd sit better on top. So you can see where the face is basically shearing off. And if I can overlay a wireframe onto this. No. So yeah. Oh wait, actually you can do it with a geometry node, can't you? Have a look at the parametric. So you can see that these ones on this surface are getting like stretched out really, really long. Whereas on the back wall, we have a much more uniform square. So if you reduce your color ramp here, then you have a lot less stretching, which is exactly what you want to avoid such bad such bad artifacts basically. So I'm still going to go pretty steep, and I'm just going to reduce this scale down. Cool. You can go quite a bit steeper still. The goal is to just stop before you break it. Which is around about 0.98. Cool, great. So that is timber framed up. And the last thing we want to do is we want to put like a kind of Watland orb kind of thing in the middle. I'm not going to do the damage on this one. It's just a bit too time consuming. But it's basically just using noise and a greater than to make holes in it. But just for now, we're just going to use noise. We're looking for a noise texture. I'm going to give it UV input here, just so it's not distorted. By default, with nothing plugged in, it's going to use generated, and generated in this case is 2 times taller than it is in X or Y, which is why it's basically being a pain. Yeah, UV map. So I'm going to go slightly higher here, slightly more detail. And this is a really simple one to do. We're just going to grab a mix, which it's basically just rough plaster. That's what we're trying to get. So this to multiply, set the color to just like a slightly creamy color. You just want a little bit of that multiply. So it's just tricking your brain into thinking there's detail. Vector displacement, gonna take, might as well just take this straight. Might increase the roughness. And then I can add a principled shader in here. And that's basically nearly done. Let's just make that a bit lower. And we don't want it to be high roughness, low specular. Cool. So if we're doing something which is such low displacement, shouldn't we be using bump? Probably. It's probably easier. We'll just need to be aware of it when we're mixing things later, that we need to generate a displacement height for this, even if it is linear. So vector bump, take the factor into the height. Normals go in. Great, it looks almost identical. Cool. Plaster. So our only job now is just to mix these together. Easier said than done. Man, I sure talk a lot. Really gets my throat. I think that's one of the good things about live streaming Blender, is it's very easy to just dictate what you're doing and what you're thinking. I always, whenever I see people streaming games or things and they've actually having to think about conversation while they're going, I just don't think I'd be able to do that. I'm so stuck in my head thinking about what I'm actually making. Simon Thomas's circuit board. Oh, November. God damn, that was such a ridiculous. His circuit board, his and Luca's. I don't know if you've seen Luca's as well. It's so good. Luca Rude. I mean, look at this thing. This is vector displacement. Ridiculous. Just from a cube. But yeah, it's just the thing with procedural textures. It's not particularly difficult to get the actual shapes right in the first place. The adding noise, add voronoi, bit of linear light, and you're good. But it's how you mix things together, and the way that he's done this on a cube, and you can see how much smaller it gets from the original cube, right? So he shrinks it to begin with, and what I was talking about getting stretching artifacts, that is how he finds the amount of mesh he needs to do all of those little things, is because he shrinks it in the first place, so he gives himself additional mesh to work with. I always fall into the trap of making things bigger, and then you just run out of geometry so quick. Right then. Let's make this a bit brighter. Yeah, so to mix this, I need... Let's start off with mixing the two stone textures. I think that's probably the easiest one. So I'm just doing Control-Shift right-click to get this green one. It's going to give me a mix. We're going to need to play with the scale in a moment as well. I would like a whole number of rows of the bottom to be the brick style ones, right? The square ones. So we can just go down here and basically where we've got the snap here, we're snapping to rows. So I'm just going to take the output from that and set this to be greater than. So now you can see that as I increase this, we're getting whole rows masked out. So I'm just going to pull this out, Alt-P to remove it from the frame. I'm just pulling that up here, connecting that to the factor. So now this greater than controls how many rows we have at the bottom. I'm going to go with 6. There we go. Excuse me. And I'm going to make my voronoi stones a bit smaller, which we can do up here. So I think the proportion between these is good, and I've got 5 and 15 at the moment. So rather than changing them individually, let's put a math node on here and just multiply them. So the bottom ones will always be 3 times higher size than the bottom ones. No, don't do that. That's not the clever way to do it. The clever way to do it is to scale the entire UV space, because I also want this noise to scale and the amount of linear light to not change. So I'm just going to add a math node in here, sorry, a vector math node set to scale. I'm going to set this up to 3 so that I have that going on in there. Cool. So that's the actual shaders mixed. We need to shade the mix the displacement now. You can see the output of these is vector output, which is convenient because we are wanting to scale a vector. Mix shaders here. just looking at this, like, why is... Oh, maybe it does make sense, actually. I was just getting a bit confused about why it looked like it was going to not go up in the middle. But actually, it's fine. I thought I'd missed a socket. So I can just use a mix RGB on this because we're going 2 different vector values. So I can take the displacement from the top and the displacement from the bottom, and I can mix them with this greater than. Potentially. Oh, that's dumb. That went into the wrong socket. There we go. And these just need to flip into the other sockets as well. Which is Alt-S, somebody told me in the last stream, which is really useful. Alt-S switches your sockets. Node Wrangler coming in handy. I also want the bottom vector to be higher, right? So I want this to come out further. And I'm also going to give it a little bit of like a buttress effect. So I'm just going to increase the scale on here. And I'm going to change the mid-level. I think that's the way I want to move that. So I'm just going to reduce this. If you find you've got a limit like 0, just type in your value. And there we go, something like that. It will be fine. I want it to come out more at the bottom than at the top, so I want it to be more like this. So I need to add a gradient to it. Basically, I need to take my Y gradient from all the way back at the beginning. I'm just going to put a reroute in that so I have it handy. And I'm just going to mix this in. We're going from 0 up, so I'm actually going to subtract it. I think that's the easiest, just so that we don't have to start thinking about doing stuff really. There we go. So you can see that that's bringing in the bottom there. I can make it steeper. I think I probably want all of it actually, which means I want my mid-level to be much further out. A different way to do this with the mid-level, if you want that to be at 0, for example, you could just add you could just add Z to it, right? Because we're going with just normal displacement here, just the displacement node. This is extruding in the Z axis of the surface. Yeah, I think that's correct. Anyway, I'm just thinking about whether or not I need to do anything to it. I mean, you could add before, so we could add to the height, or I think you could just add afterwards. Oh no, if we start adding afterwards, then we're going to start looking at vector displacement, and we're working in like world scale, so let's keep it simple and just add before instead. So remove all of that. So I'm just adding, I'm just doing it by eye. We are going to get some shearing artifacts on the top of there. Yeah. You could be a bit neater and have like less mortar, so you don't have mortar stat on top. That's just a job of masking. Do we want to do that? So I could, instead of taking this snapped value that I have here, I could just take the actual Y value instead. And so Alt Shift right click, I'm going to take the Y into the value there. So instead of this snapping to that 1 to that 6, we can just put this down to like 5.95, something like that, just so we don't have the mortar on top. We're also getting a little bit of getting some shearing on these rocks as well. If you wanted the rocks to look like they were cut in, then we could do another little bit of masking and multiplying. Joining materials together like this is all just a game of masking. That's all it is at this point. So I can take this value here, and if I was to subtract it from this 6 value, or well, close to anyway, because we're going to go slightly higher. Is this what I want to do? No, we're going to go this way actually. I'm in. Good night, mate. Thanks for swinging by. So I'm just going to hit this onto this displacement, onto the displacement mask. Oh no, definitely not the displacement mask. So we still want the displacement mask to be our greater than, but we want to multiply this. I'm just going to clamp that subtract. So it's just clamping that between 0 and 1. And then I'm just going to multiply this just up in here, just so that we get that straight line across the bottom of the rocks. Come a little bit lower. Might also just bring that down. So at the moment it's coming up like this, but we want it to just be basically starting the rocks there. Same old, so we're just going to add a color dodge in here. Set to white, and you can see that I'm now pulling that down, just so the rocks look like they've been cut off above the other surface. And just throw a soft light in there for good measure, just so that we get the rounding. Just tweak those values until they work. Cool. Good stuff. So I think this needs to scale down a little bit. And then I want to add my timber frame on top. Cool. I think my lower ones are a little bit dark as well. Sorry, a little bit bright. There we go. So to work out my height for the plaster to start in, I'm just thinking the timber frame is basically going to go on top because it's the highest thing. It goes on top of the plaster just to make things easier. So I need to work out my height for my plaster, and I can work that out from my timber frame. Because when we subtract it here, and then we do the absolute and then we do the subtract, we can basically put plaster, I was going to say anywhere which is above this point, but actually that's not ideal because then we're going to end up with it above as well. If we have any gap above the timber frame, and I want plaster above the timber frame, not just within that one panel. So, well, I can see that we're going up 0.75 and then we're going back down 0.2. So I can just say separate XYZ, take the UV map, and take the Y where it is greater than 0.55, and that should be, yeah, that's in alignment with that edge there. So that's where we want to add plaster. So I'm going to go Control Shift right click. I'm connecting the plaster principled and the mix that we just made. This one we don't need. And I'm going to plug that greater than in as the factor. And I'm going to Alt S to swizzle those. I think I want this to be higher. don't I? I want the timber frame to be higher up. More like 0.6, 0.65, something like that, just so I've got a little bit more of this visible. So just to make sure that we're doing the same thing here. Actually, I'll line it up by eye once I've got the plaster in. So I need to mix up my displacement as well. We don't have any displacement for the plaster. So I'm just setting the displacement value of that to be black, which is just going to be the it's just the existing level of the plane, basically. You see that plane is now on the plaster level. Yeah, I think that's going to be best. And now I just need to mix in the timber, nice and easy. So again, going to just take that mix and the principled, Control Shift right click. Our mix is this one. So I can just plug that in. I'm going to Alt S, going to swizzle that again. So we've got our color in front, which is fine. Just need to do the same thing with our displacement vector. So I'm going to plug that in as our second vector there. And again, there we go. So this is pretty good, but we're obviously cutting through that bottom bit of stone. We want this timber frame to sit on top of the stone, because the stone is going to be protecting it from rot. So it's going to take our mask that we made down here. This is the top of the wall, that greater than. And this is going to get multiplied by this. Yeah, multiplied by this. Actually in both cases. So I don't want to view it right now. So I'm just going to Shift right click on it just so I've got that reroute, just so I can work with it as one item. And I'm going to just connect those two together. That's Alt right click and drag. Multiply. So now you can see that we are only working with the section above the wall. If I go back to my vector, then we have this looking kind of funky where the wall is too shallow, and also this is too low. So we were at 0.55 before, we are now at 0.65, so I need to go up and then shrink it. So I need to go up by 1 and shrink it by, there we go, maybe up by 0.5. Just trying to work out how this goes now. 0.15, yeah, that'll do. Nice, and I can reduce my color burn to make these a little bit more slender, the timbers. Great. I just need to move my bottom wall out basically, and I might also just reduce the amount of displacement there. Just going to add a little bit to that bottom wall. Yeah, something like that. Cool. So that's it. That's the wall. That's it. That's nice art. Such a nicely. When I was doing it before, I did each of the sections combined into. Yeah, so it was just one principal BSDF and one displace node at the end, and the masking was a lot of extra work. So this is, yeah, this has been easier, definitely doing it afterwards. I just want to show you a really quick way to bake, because I know baking is array the wall. And then put it above. Yeah, it does not. I'm having some issues here. It looks kind of sick though. There's just something about working procedurally that's just great. If you want it to be exactly over the sides here, then this subtract, if you just set it to 0.25, then we get rid of those. I'm going to set it back to 0.2. I kind of like the double frame. Cool. So you want this for a game. We're going to be working in Eevee because Eevee renders very quickly. Obviously, if you're in cycles and you set to CPU compute, then you have your bake options and you can do all of your baking, and that's fine. That is up to you if you want to do it that way. But we're in a we're just using a plane, right? So it doesn't need to be that hard because nothing gets occluded. We're just doing normal displacement, face on, going up in the z-axis from the surface. And yeah, you wouldn't be able to do this method if you were working on like a rounded surface where you have stuff coming out of view. This only works if everything is facing the camera. So I'm just going to add a camera here. Here we go. Alt R to reset rotation. Rotate in the X 90. So it just needs to be facing the wall exactly. I want my UV space. This is 50% of the UV space, right? So it's only the left-hand side. Just gonna I'm gonna set my color management. This is really important. You need to set color management to be standard because we can't have a this should be fairly quick, don't worry. You don't want any kind of view transform. If we're doing a height map between 0 and 1, we want it to finish off between 0 and 1. We don't want anything above, and we don't want anything. We just want it to be, we want it to work nicely. So, yeah, I'm just thinking about this now. The way that I've done the height map, because I've mixed it all separately, I'm going to have to like get the height map back from the displacement information. It should be possible. Cool, so set your camera to be orthographic. This is going to give you obviously no perspective. Our plane, which we can see here, it should be 4 high. Yeah, 4 by 2. So if we set our camera to have an orthographic scale of 4, that's going to be the correct height. I'm going to be baking 4K maps, 4096. And I'm just going to move my camera across. So we're just using that left-hand half of the image map area. Great. Cool. Thanks for coming by, man. Yeah. I'm looking at this now like, God, this is a lot of noodles that I've got to try and work out. So I need to turn off the displacement. We need it to be shadeless. This is the issue. Just gotta bear with while it compiles the shaders. Sorry if the screen starts lagging. Eevee can be a bit of a hog. Oh, there we go. Cool. Right. So if you have to apply this procedural texture on a more complex shape like Suzanne, yeah, you would need, well, I mean, the good thing about Suzanne is she's already unwrapped. But yeah, if you're doing a custom mesh, you would need it to be unwrapped. If you're baking, I feel like people frown on using the Smart UV Unwrap, but if you're baking it or you're texture painting, then I don't really see the issue of using it. I've used it a lot without any issues. So that's just doing the Smart UV project and increase the island margin. Sometimes you do, I mean, it's good. Yeah, okay, so for a lot of things, you do need to set your own seams, mark seams properly. But yeah, I've done a lot of stuff with just using the Smart UV project and it's worked really well. Right, so I am basically just going to quickly run through joining up my color inputs from each of these. Oh man, Eevee with its shader compilations. I'm just going to jump back into Cycles really quickly while I work this out because Cycles does not hold up your computer when you're computing stuff. So the greater than goes into the factor. So the reason I'm doing this is because I want it as a viewer, right? I want an emission that has the color coming out at the end of it. And we're going to do the same thing, the height information coming out at the end of it. And that's also going to give us an opportunity to take the height information and normalize it to be between 0 and 1. So I'm just adding that into there. Saving, thank you. Honestly, I don't actually save my own projects when I'm working on them. It's really bad. Thank you, but I know that you've, what is it, like 2:30? God, it must be late for you, maybe 3 o'clock for you guys down there. Thanks for staying, man. Right, where am I taking this from? Taking the greater than for that factor. And I'm taking another mix node, taking the color information, taking the, oh wait, not that one. Taking this color information and taking this mix factor multiplied by that bottom one. There we go. So this is our surface, right? This is the color information of our surface. You save every time your computer has a lag. I used to be so well trained at saving because Blender never used to warn you if you're about to quit without saving. So it used to be like I would move the camera and I would save. Literally like everything I would do, I would save immediately. But I've just got autosave set to like, I think it's once a minute. And the autosaves are so... They're so good. There's so many of them. I mean, look at this. It's crazy. It's so good at keeping autosaves. It's when it stops responding and it goes white and it's just like Windows is waiting to solve the problem. It's like, oh God, I haven't saved for an hour. Right, so head back into Eevee, just wait for this to compile for a sec. Great. Hit F12 and that's now, that's baked. Great. Compositing, here we go, here's our map, image, save as. This is our diffuse. I'm just going to save it as RGB because we don't need the alpha. If you wanted to save a normal output, I think you would actually need to use the normal, like the baking. Maybe, maybe not. We'll have a look at that in a sec as well. I'm just going to turn down the compression. There we go, save as. So that's part one. Head back into procedural textures. So I'm just going to head back through here. And every time I've taken a mix node, I'm just going to replace it with the height information. I'll hop into here. coming in here, so the height information before the displacement node. And that goes into the bottom of this one. Yep. Next one is our plaster, which doesn't have any height information. We just had that set to that's slightly difficult because we're not using mid-levels here. And we're just going to have to double check and maybe calibrate some things afterwards. Just because of like the individual mid-level settings on this displacement node are going to change stuff. Oh, and the scale. I'm just going to use multiply add node on each one actually. It's probably an easy way to do it. So you can just add a converter math node, set this to be multiply add, right? So your input value gets multiplied by something and then something gets added to it. So you can set this to be your scale and your mid-level. Reset that. So I'm just going to put this onto each one of the input noodles. Thoughts on format CG Master? So OpenEXR for height maps. I would use OpenEXR if I was doing this like properly. Like if it was client work, I would use OpenEXR. Oops. Just because you can save it lossless, or is it lossless? It's certainly like a big format anyway. It lets you do 32-bit float. Yeah, I don't know if they're compressed either. I've never actually tried bump as a format for doing this. Where's that coming from? We're coming from the height of our timber here. Great. So just to calibrate this real quick, I'm just going to view our shader. Should be in cycles. Here we go. So we can view our shader, and I can just set a vector displacement on here. So if you were to do this with one displacement and one principle at the end, then it would make this a lot of an easier process, just because you would be just plugging in your outputs already, and they would already have been calibrated. So let's just see what I've got down here. So my mid-level is 0, and I'm doing 20, 0.7 divided by 20, which is a small number. 0.7 divided by 20. Great, yeah, that looks like that's going to work. So this one was set to 0.5 and 0.06. So 0.5, 0.06. Oh wait, sorry. 0.06, 0.5, because these are upside down. I'm just going to reduce that. There we go. Oh, and I can hear my little PC fan spinning. Not having a good time with all of this displacement. We can see that our plaster is way too far back there, so I'm just going to increase this to somewhere that's sort of plausible. Something like that. Great, so this is our height map but I need to make sure that it is within a 0 to 1 range, because when we save it as an image, because I'm not using OpenEXR, I'm just using PNGs here, just for ease and file size, I need to make sure that I have a correctly mapped range, because otherwise stuff's going to get clamped to 0 to 1. So, easy way for us to do this, I can just take a math node, right, and I can set this to compare. What compare does is it says this input value, how close is it to our middle value, or yeah, so this value input, and the epsilon is the range that it can have. So it can be between, if the epsilon is 0, then at the moment it would have to be exactly 6.4 for that to show true. So for example, if I set this to be 0.5, which is apparently, that doesn't look like 0.5. Anyway, how confusing. Let's plug this in as a value here. I wonder if it's doing some funny business with like the 2.2. Yeah, so there we go. So if this is set to 0.5 with an epsilon of 0.01, then 0.51 fits within that. So we want 0 to 1, so 0.5 with an epsilon of 0.5 should be 1 is inside it, but 1.001 is not inside it. Equally, 0 is inside, but minus 0.00001 is not. So we can use that to basically say, is everything inside, which it actually does appear to be. So another thing that's important to do with displacement maps is you want to have you want your height map to be as high a range as possible. Because if it's all between 0.3 and 0.4, then when it comes onto your model, you're going to have some serious banding issues. And that's one of the issues of using 8-bit or 16-bit, where really you want to be using an EXR where you can have 32-bit. I think that's right anyway. Oh man, my eye. Okay. I'm back, let's do this. So I'm just before my compare, so this is basically my debug node. I'm just going to multiply, no, I'm going to map range. I'm going to map range so I can change my upper and lower limits together. So I'm going to increase my high point, there we go, we can see that's just coming out there now. So I'm going to reduce it slightly, just holding shift. Great, so now there's no black on here. And I'm going to increase my minimum. Am I? That's weird. Oh, I'm an idiot. My 0 to 1 output needs to be the same, but my input needs to change. So I need to just increase this until we start seeing black spots on our height map. I'm just looking at the back of it so I can see better. There we go, I'll take that. That's just got a little bit cut off. And on the front, I'm just going to reduce this minimum, sorry, the from maximum. So there we go, we've remapped this to a correct range so that our camera is going to be able to take this view. Just jump it back into Eevee. So now, if I just save real quick, hit F12. There we go. So we do have this little black bit, but otherwise this is our height map. Yeah, that's the step for normalizing it. I know that we have the normalized node, but that only works with vectors and it basically makes the hypotenuse length 1. Yeah, so this is the way that you need to do it with scalar values. I always just use that compare because it's like it gives you a hard cut off 0 to 1 if you set it to 0.5, 0.5. It's just an easy method. Seeing as we were talking about bumps, let's try it. I don't know. I just want to Google this. Are bumps lossy? In Blender. There we go. So apparently bitmap paint is an early lossless format. So you could use bump to be lossless. So I can definitely see why that would be used for height maps and normal maps, because you're not supposedly you're not going to get banding. So let's give it a go. So exporting as a BMP. This is the height. And I'm just going to do one more thing. Yeah, I'm going to do one more thing. So we're going to take our height map here, and I'm going to put it through a bump node. So if we view the output of this bump node with that in the height, you can see it looks hideous, but it's pointing in all the right directions. But we don't have the bump from the... Yeah, okay. I'm just wondering, because we've got bump in the... Sorry, I'm dragging this out a little bit. I want to get the bump basically from the surface of the rocks. That's what I'm trying to do now. But I've got it plugged into a bump node here, which is the issue. So I want to pull this. Okay, so I've got 1, 2, 3, I've got 4 bump nodes that I want to bring in. So I'm just going to do Control-Shift-D on my array of mixes here. All I'm doing is I'm mixing bump nodes together. So sorry that this is probably quite confusing. I just want to show you how to make a normal map. Because you can do it really easily this way without baking anything. And baking is notoriously bad in Blender. So I'm just taking my bump information here. You can, yeah, but it's because they're not masked. That's my issue. I'm new because I've got 4 different wall finishes here. If I was to just have the bump map like of this bottom one, then you can see that we've got like brick bumps going on up at the top here, which I don't want to have. So what I need is this middle one. So I'm just taking the bump node into the bump socket here. The bottom one, so this bump one comes into the top socket there. This middle one is going to be our plaster, which is the top group. Just going to do that trick, Shift Alt, right click, going from, so from bump to color 2 there. And then the last color 2 is our bumps in the middle here. Cool. So if I were to just view this output, I'm just going to cut that displacement. So you can see that we have the bumps for all of the surface of the rocks. And I can now say this displacement, just when it compiles, So this is the displacement of the surface, and I can take the existing normals from our mixed bump nodes. Yeah, so that's what you just said, Sangler. I can now take all of that bump information before into the normal map, sorry, into the normal socket of this bump node. Looking good so far. I'm just going to reduce this slightly. 5.5. I just don't like that bright green artifact, so I think that's probably a little bit glitchy. And then I need to, so at the moment we have a range of 0 to 1. No, we don't, sorry. Normals have a range of -1 to +1. So we need to add 1 and then divide by 2 to make sure that we have a range of 0 to 1. So this is why when you look at a normal map, it looks like a kind of a brighter blue color. So if I take a vector math node here, so vector math, I'm going to add 1 to everything, including the Z. And then I'm going to scale this down by 0.5. Fingers crossed. Doesn't really look right, does it? Wasn't expecting to be bright pink. Oh, good lord. Do you know what? I think it's because everything's pointing back in a vertical axis. Let me just do that. There we go. Oh, so there we go. That looks right now, doesn't it? It was just because it was, you can see as I'm rotating that, it's taking the world normal into account. So I'm just going to go Alt-G, Alt-R on the camera and move it up 1, move it across 1 as well, just so that we're back in that same position. There we go. A pretty and unexpected transformation for vector math. Yeah, yeah. So you know when you get a normal map and it comes in like this, if you put this through a bump map, through a normal map node, it converts it back to that full range. Oh boy, it did not like that, did it? Oh, interesting. It's pretty and unexpected. Oh yeah, yeah, the translation, the rotation. Okay, well I'm hoping that these artifacts, they're not going to come through. Okay, so I'm literally just going to cook it. I'm going to bake this now. F12, just to render it just like normal. So we're rendering this output now. It's been transformed to a 0 to 1. Normalize that vector. Ooh, I can see my camera's lagging on my preview. Ah, there we go. Cool. So this should just be our normal map now. Save as normal. I'm going to save this as a bitmap as well, just to see how that comes out. Cool. So if I open a new version of Blender now, we're going to do this with modifiers because we've baked the height map. So I can just take a plane, scale twice, and unwrap it. Just need to make sure that my unwrap is correct, or on one side anyway. So hopefully that's the right way. So it needs to be that way, -90. Great. So I can import my those maps that we just baked. All right, so stone wall. I'm going to take my diffuse here. Take the vector, and that's our diffuse map. Plug that into the base value here. We didn't bake out roughness or anything like that, so I'm just going to go for low specular and high roughness. I am also just going to rotate it so it's upright. And just for good measure, I'm going to put this into Eevee just so you know there's no funny business going on. So I'm going to add two modifiers. I'm going to add a subdivision surface set to simple so that we're keeping the same geometry. And then I'm going to add a displace modifier. And let's jump into here. New image or movie. I'm going to open. Just going to wait for my hard drive to spin up. I'm going to open stone wall. We're going to open the height map. Right. I really hope this works. So we're going to use the UV coordinates. It's just the normal. Hey, great. Okay, so we just need a lot more geometry. So I'm just going to add a little bit of it manually. I just added that horizontal first time, just so that I had squares, basically. So this is looking a-okay so far. Just going to reduce the strength a little bit. I could probably come down a little bit on this. So I'm going to keep it high for a sec, and then, and then I'm going to collapse it. So if I add a decimate modifier now, at the moment we're sitting at 600,000 verts, but if I go down to like, I want to hit around 40, I think, or maybe lower. I mean, you could at this point retopologize by hand, and that would give you like way lower. We're just going to go down to 0.06. I think that'll be around 40,000. So I just need to wait for this to compute. It's doing a lot of hard work. But hopefully. Great. It's actually around about 70. So you can see that the mesh, I think we can go even lower here, 0.045. And this is why we baked out the normal map as well, just because we're getting a lot of, well, it smooths out all of the subdivisions. So it's important to have a lot of subdivisions in the first place so that you get the correct shape, but then to decimate it so that you have a workable mesh. So we're at 60,000 now. I'm just going to shade smooth. That was surprisingly hard for it to work out. And then once this, here we go. Now this is done, we can just jump back into shader view, add another image map, add the normal map here. Are these big files? Oh yeah, they're not small, are they? 100 meg and 50 meg? Actually, the BMP's bumps, they are half the size of the PNG, which I'm kind of surprised about because they're supposedly lossless. Oh yeah, so we need a normal map node here, vector, normal map, color into color, normal into normal. That's definitely back to front. Make it non-color. Actually, the way that we baked this is using color. So if I was to change this to non-color, watch me be wrong now. Yeah, you can see how shiny that is, even though we have really high roughness. It's because it actually is the color. Because we didn't bake it, because we didn't bake it like properly, we just rendered the actual color information. However, when I've done stuff with Unity, I've always had a massive ball ache trying to get stuff in that requires you to use non-color, whereas using stuff which just takes the color directly has always given me a much better result. I don't know. It's a weird one, but I guess it's to do with the color management and the display device. Maybe if you would set that to none. Yeah, maybe if you would set that to none, then that would not be. It's to do with like the gamma conversion in the values, which I think is like a to the power of 2.2 or to the root of 2.2. Yeah, so when I baked the normal map, I must have accidentally reflected it. So I'm just gonna vector math. What am I doing? I'm going to use a mapping node actually. So scale x 1 minus 1, and then x position needs to be 1. Needs to be 1.5. There we go. That's lining up now. That was just because when I put it on its back, I must have flipped it accidentally. Cool. So that's how you get, or it's a very cheap way to bake and get things like this. There's two ways. If you want to apply a stack of modifiers and you don't have the add-on that gives you, I don't have the add-on, I don't think I need it. You can either go into Object, Apply, Visual Geometry to Mesh, and what this lets you do is if you have 1,000 objects in your scene, all with a modifier stack, and you want to apply all of them at the same time, then it'll just do that. All of them that are selected anyway, it will convert. And you can see that what it's saying is it's converting selected objects to another type, which is mesh, from curve, meta, surface, or text. So it is the same operation as just doing like a convert to mesh. And I think there might be another way to do that. Maybe a hard ups thing. But yeah, I always just do apply visual geometry to mesh. So it's just going to take a sec to bake that down into editable geometry. But then that, I'm just going to load up Godot just so that we've got something to test it with. Is there a way to set Godot to have like a consistent place that you put things? Because I cannot remember where I put stuff. Oh, there we go. This is wall test 2, I guess. So here we go. So this is baked out that geometry, which you can see is still pretty dense. but it is at least properly textured and properly distorted. I might just throw on another decimate and just see if we can get that down even further. You basically want to keep going until it starts breaking. It's starting to get a little bit lumpy, but we are also quite a lot lower. There we go, that's around 20,000. I'm going to apply that, that's better. So a much more open geometry. I'm going to export this as an FBX. Stonewall.fbx. Selected objects, export FBX. And now in here, this is today's 19th. Yep. So I can go into my Godot folder. I'm just going to drag this in. I don't know if it needs my maps as well, not the height, but the diffuse and the normal. Can you tell I'm not a game developer? There we go, 33%. I'm sure there's a better way to organize your project files. There we go, just dragging that in. 3DC. Great. I don't know how to move it, but oh, there we go. Cool. So this is technically in, we just don't have any lighting. I should really learn how to use this software. It looks like it's really useful. Funny. Cool. Well, anyway, so I know it's not like an efficient way to get stuff into a game engine. You are better off, honestly, better off modeling. But it is possible. And you can array this as much as you want. So there we go. That is, I feel like we covered a lot of bases there. Hopefully that was interesting and maybe you learned something from the process. We did a lot of different stuff. Just trying to find the actual plane and the material. Cool. So there we go. That's our shader, and that's our displacement. Great. Nice. Okay. Thanks guys, thanks for coming. Honestly, I know it's been like 3.5 hours. Sorry it's lasted so long. It's yeah. It's just I knew I had like a bunch of stuff that I wanted to go through, but yeah. Thanks for sticking by. Nice one. Well, yeah. Damn, 20 past 11. I should go and get some food or something. So I'm gonna love you and leave you.